Welcome to the Down Dog Athletics Podcast, a competitor's guide to mental health and mastery, your resource for conversations around mental health and the mindsets necessary to master every area of your life. My name is Paul Klingen, and I'm a former Division I athlete that struggled with my mental health until I started yoga, which opened me up to other practices that gave me a balanced approach to my physical and mental health. The goal of this podcast is to inspire others to do the same, train and compete like an athlete, while also having the ability to slow down and practice stillness. When you can do both, you find balance and evolve into a greater version of yourself. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Down Dog Athletics Podcast, competitor's guide to mental health and mastery. My name is Paul Klingen, and I'm your host. And I've got a favor for you guys right off the bat. I'm asking you for a favor, so hold on. Help me out here. I want to have a call tag for you guys. I don't know if that's the name for it, but I'll listen to other podcasts or I'll listen to other shows and say you guys are the hound dogs or you guys are the barnacles, or these are just random words that are popping in my head right now. But what would be a good name for Down Dog Athletics Podcast listeners? What is the name of that community? Shoot me a message, shoot me a text, shoot me an email, however you want to get a hold of me, and let me know what you think would be good ones, and I'll find some way to have a vote or some way to have a little bit of democracy for this decision, because I think it would be fun to be able to introduce the podcast and start to figure out, like, who's this tribe, who's this community that's tuning into this podcast, listening to the guests, and enjoying a lot of the dialogue that I have back and forth, either with myself or with the different people that I'm interviewing. And hopefully you got a chance to listen to the last podcast that I did with David Thomas and the different takeaways that I had with my marathon. And whether you're an athlete or you're just a runner or you're just really working towards any goal that is outside of your comfort zone, I think there's a lot of takeaways that you could have from that podcast. And that's always my goal with this podcast, is to help educate, inspire, and help you become a better version of yourself. But I would just love to kind of start to really massage what this listener, what you are as a listener, like, what is that core? What is that ethos? What is that, what do you guys want to be called? Basically, it could be something totally random, totally funny. I'd be fine with that as well. I just want to have some sort of intro. I think that would be really fun, something I've been thinking about. And speaking of the marathon, one of the things that I posted about most recently is the last 4 or 5 months, I've been working with a therapist. And initially, 4 years ago, if I would have said that in person, I would have been terrifying. That's so much vulnerability. I would have thought of as a therapist as someone that works with mentally weak people. But now the perspective that I have is really that it's helping me optimize who I am as a human being. And the same way we go to a physical therapist to optimize our movement, I enjoy talking with my therapist to optimize my mental thoughts, because motor pathways, neural pathways, are the same for movement and the same for thoughts. And I want to make sure that the routes that I take from a mental standpoint are just as efficient and healthy as the movements that I make as a weightlifter, as an athlete, as a runner. And I think a big thing that I took away is just that running a marathon on my own shows a lot of mental toughness. I'm definitely mentally strong and mentally tough, but I'm also someone that wants help with my mental health. That's not a weird thing, especially during COVID, when we are seeing rates of anxiety, depression. People are really stressed about the future, and that's normal, and it's going to get even worse as we move on, and we don't even know how neuroplasticity is going to affect how the brain is adapting to these environments, to isolation, to uncertainty. And so to work with someone, I think makes a lot of sense, and it's helped me a ton. But I guess the big message that I just want to have before I get into this guest, who's actually also really big into mindset, meditation, mental performance, and just overall human optimization, is you can be mentally strong and you can get help with your mental performance, your mindset, or your mental health. It's not one or the other, it's both and. And that's my message going into this podcast. And I just, mental health podcast, I'd like to make sure and carve out some time to share and talk about those things that, again, people message me all the time. They're like, hey, thank you for bringing this up. Thank you for standing there. And, again, I don't really feel any shame talking about it, because I have this perspective of, I want to be the best version of myself. And if I can get someone to help me work on my mentals, sweet, let's do that. And for today's guest, we have Ryan Munsey. And I met Ryan Munsey through Ryland Hormel, who works with Ryan Munsey on the Better Human Project, which is a podcast. But I also met him through Jason and Brett, who are from Live Better Co. I've been on their retreats, and they're actually on one of my first podcasts. It's been one of the most well-received, most listened to podcasts. I believe it's episode 3 or 4. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure and check that podcast out after this one. Be sure and listen to this one first, then go to that one. But Rylan connected us, and as he was connecting us, we were exchanging information. I read his book, Fuck Your Feelings. And as I was reading through it, I was like, wow, I can totally see why this connection made sense. There's so many practices, exercises rooted in science that are aligned with a lot of what I do and talk about and preach as a health and wellness professional. But Ryan Munsey is able to speak the language of a neuroscientist and is able to use the science to explain why things like meditation, breathwork, cold therapy can change the way we perform and navigate life. And one thing that I really liked about his book, Fuck Your Feelings, is that it's a self-development book in a way, but with actual substance. It's not just fluff. It's not just repeating things over and over again. His book is packed with science-based, actionable tools to really accomplish anything and become the ultimate version of ourselves, which, again, is what this podcast is all about. And so I'm really excited also to have Ryan on, because this is the first time I'm doing a free giveaway. Ryan provided a signed copy of his book, and anyone that tags Ryan Munsey and I with an image of the podcast thumbnail, just showing us that you're listening to, I'm going to give one person this signed copy. And so really appreciate Ryan making that available for us. And someone's going to get a copy of this book that is packed with basically life-changing tools for your life. And if you haven't got it on Audible yet, definitely get it on Audible as well. But it's a book that I will go through and read multiple times beyond just the first read through on hard copy and on Audible. And before I get into the meat of the podcast, just want to share a little bit more background on the guest. So as I mentioned, he's the co-founder and host of the Better Human Project. He's also a high-performance consultant, author, and speaker, working with different C-suite executives, special forces operators, and Olympic athletes, just to name a few. And prior to that, he was a nutritionist, gym owner, fitness model, and corporate wellness consultant. And so say all that just to give you a little bit of background. This guy's walked the walk, he's talked the talk, and he's done so much research within this book, and you'll hear a lot of it in this podcast. And so be excited. Let's get to this episode with Ryan Munsey. Ryan Munsey, welcome to the Down Dog Athletics Podcast.
Paul, thanks for having me on, man. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, I've been really interested in having you on and picking your brain ever since we connected through Ryland Hormel, who's worked with you on the Better Human Project. And he's also worked with Brett and Jason at Live Better Co. They were on the first podcast I did for the Down Dog Athletics podcast. And so as I got to read your book, Fuck Your Feelings, and really dive into a lot of your content, I could see why he thought it'd be so good to connect us, because there's so many things that you talk about from a neural standpoint, from just a human optimization standpoint. And then a lot of things you talk about yoga also is really interesting. And so I think one of the first things I'd love to dive into is one of the first topics you have in your book, which is states versus traits, but specifically maybe how COVID is really creating this state, maybe this hurricane of a storm that's coming over our lives right now, and how that might be affecting us neurologically.
Yeah, and I like the way that you went with a weather phenomenon, because the other way that I talk about states and traits is weather versus climate. And so for anybody that hasn't read this or heard it yet, states are short-term, transient ways of being. And traits, on the other hand, are patterns that have more to do with who we are and how we are on a consistent and kind of long-term basis. And so, like I said, we can also look at that as weather versus climate. If you think about Russia, or if you think about Florida, you're in Seattle. Anytime somebody says Seattle to me, I think rain. You can attest to the fact that there are plenty of days where it is sunny and beautiful outside. Same thing in Russia. There are days where it's not cold and snowy. And even though Florida is the sunshine state, there are days where they have hurricanes and days where, it's not warm and sunny. So the point with that is to, highlight how we can stereotype people and places and things based on their norm, and to, remember that just because something is the norm, that's not how it is all the time. And so when we start talking about states and traits, I think that term or phrase came into my use several years ago. I was in the biohacking space, and I saw so many people chasing states, and they would do anything possible to get into, this ultimate state for any given day. And a lot of those actions for today came at the detriment of tomorrow or long term. And, that's where I really started to kind of come up with that as a teaching phrase to help people understand, look, I'm not saying that it's not a good thing to be able to manipulate or alter your state on command. It definitely is. But, let's focus on these habits that can not only change our states for the better in the short term, but that we know based on research and science can also positively alter our traits long term. And so, I started looking at these state shifting modalities, if you will, as tools in the toolbox. And my first choice of tool to use in any scenario is going to be a tool that has positive long-term benefits, positive trait altering benefits, as opposed to something that is, hey, just get me where I need to be right now, and I'll deal with tomorrow when that comes, right? That's not a recipe for sustainability and long-term health. And so, as you mentioned, a lot of these modalities have a lot of overlap with what you do and what you teach. There's yoga, there's breath work, there's meditation. All of these things have volumes of studies and research to support how they positively impact our brains and our health in the long run. And so that's what I'm talking about when I say things that both positively impact states in the now and traits long term.
Yeah. And I love the part about people, want to have this state that they get to stay in, as if they think that they don't have to continually sweep the floor. And it really does come down to having traits that allow you to withstand the hurricane that comes in or the sweltering heat. And so I'm glad that you brought up the different things like breath work and meditation and ways to really enhance those traits. One of the things that I found that I really like about traits as well is that it's something that you can continually build on. But one of the things that is also interesting is people have their own different sets of traits naturally. So I might naturally be 7 foot. I might naturally be passive. How can we really lean into the traits that we already have that are maybe positive for us? There's always going to be positives and negatives, but how can we really amplify those positive traits and then shore up on the back end any traits that might be detrimental at times?
Yeah, I think the answer there really involves a lot of reflection, introspection, a lot of auditing. Who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I want to move through this world? And those are not those are not superficial and easy questions to answer. They're deep, and they get right to the core and the heart of who we are. And it's a shame that those types of questions and that type of thinking isn't taught everywhere, right? To me, I think that's something that that should just be part of education, and everybody should be equipped with that type of I guess education, for lack of a better word. Yeah. But to your point, I mean, I think if we can all kind of find some space and sit with those questions, and that's why there's so many of the reflection type questions in the book, is because I want people to be, as you read this and as you go through it, I want you to be able to pause and implement some of the things that are easily implemented, but then there are a lot of other things in the book that are going to make you ask those types of questions. And as you alluded to, all of our traits, all of our values, the way that each of us will answer those questions of who am I? How do I want to move through the world? How do I want to be seen? What's important to me? What's my impact going to be? What do I want my legacy to be? Ask 10 different people that, and you're going to get 9 or 10 different answers. And, because of that there's no one pill, one prescription. And that's another thing that, especially in the social media world, we get really fixated on these blanket statements and, just give me the formula, just give me the 10 steps or give me the 90-day program or do this. And that really doesn't exist. And, the way to find that, the answer, if you will, or the path, the way for yourself, I have found, and in the people that I coach and work with, it is, to ask those types of questions that enable you to get to the answers that illuminate who you are and who you want to be. And then once you have that, we talk in the book about awareness creates choice. And I know I was trying not to get that in this answer because I know that's going to come up in some other things. But the way this works is awareness creates choice. And then in that moment of choice, we are confronted with, do I want to continue down the path that I'm on, or do I want to choose another route? And the rest of that decision-making matrix is made significantly easier if we have previously defined our values. And so that's another exercise within the book. And a lot of those jumping off questions are the same ones that I just threw out. I work with a lot of companies and C-suites, leadership, executives, and I'm always amazed when I go into these groups and I ask them to write down the company values. And I'd say 75% of the time, people in the room can write down the gist of, those core values. And then I ask them to write down their personal values. They can't do it because they've never thought about it. They've never done it.
Wow.
And so it's always interesting to me that as individuals, we don't know, we haven't sat with that question. We haven't consciously or intentionally outlined what are my values as a person, right? So what does Paul stand for? Who is Paul? What does he stand against? What are the most important things in his world? When people, if I went and I talked to Jason and Brett and Rylan, and I asked them to tell me about Paul, what are the words that they're going to use to describe you? And so when we start to think about how we want to be seen, be remembered, what impact do we want to make? How do we want others to think of us and talk about us? That starts to inform how we want to act. And this exercise is in the book. I've got some free videos. I can give you the link and we can put it in the show notes to walk people through that. But the idea is that we come up with 3 words that are our values. And certainly you can have more, but to just have 3, the shorter the list, the easier it is to keep it, kind of in the front of your mind, right? The longer the list, the harder it is to memorize, right? And the whole point of this exercise is to make it simple and something that you can check in with regularly. And I'll spoil the whole exercise, but I have people do this. They pick their 3 words, and then they take out their cell phone and they set an alert on their phone. And same time every day, this alarm goes off and it just says, am I being that person? And it has the 3 words, whatever your 3 words are. So your question, getting all the way back to that of, how do we highlight the good? How do we shore up the bad? How do we shore up weak spots? However you want to talk about that. If we have identified and written down what our values are, it becomes that much easier to make sure that we are acting in alignment with those values. And on the other hand, if we've never done that, it's almost impossible to act in alignment with something that you've never defined.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that I loved that was really a core tenet throughout the book was just the importance of awareness and those core values. And I like how you answered the question too, because you said you can't really give a blanket statement. And a lot of people will go to social media or their friends and ask for advice. But a lot of times that advice you'll get is from the lens of that one person. So Gary Vee might tell you to work way harder. But if you're already somebody who puts 20 hours a day in, maybe you need advice from someone who's going to tell you to be more relaxed, more parasympathetic. And so it becomes the work of the individual to become aware, identify those core values as you talked about. And I love that you had reflection questions at the end of every chapter because it gave actionable steps as opposed to just like, all right, carrying on. And it gave you something to actually work towards. And so once you have that awareness, then you're able to work towards whatever it is that you want to do. And that's another thing that I loved about your book is figuring out what it is that you want to do. And this is where the fuck your feelings part comes in, is what is in alignment with your values and what does your brain, your body want you to do? What does society want you to do? And you have to fuck your feelings and go do what is in alignment with your core values.
Yeah, and it's funny. I always use the example of an Olympic athlete, and I do that because we all know that the Olympics occur every 4 years, and the longer it's going to take us to accomplish our goal, the more opportunities we have along the way to make a decision that is based on feelings, right? And in some cases, depending on the decision, one decision based on feelings may or may not destroy your attempt at becoming an Olympian, right? Like, you could think of really stupid decisions where one bad decision derails everything, right? We're not really talking about or focusing on those types of decisions. Catastrophic mistakes. We're not talking about those. We're talking about, and again, like, let's use our Olympic example. And just because you say, okay, hey, I'm going to be an Olympian and I'm going to compete in the next Olympic Games, it usually doesn't work that way, right? It usually starts at, you're 8, 12, maybe younger. And you have to train for most of your life, right? 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, who knows? And then the next Olympic cycle comes around. So, it's really not just a 4-year run up to become an Olympian. It's a much longer process than that. And so if we look at all the things that one has to do to become an Olympian, right? The mastery of the mental, like the tactical side of their sport, whatever it is, right? If you talk to an Olympian in volleyball, they know everything about the strategy of volleyball, right? They know everything about the technical side of, how to serve and how to dig and how to do this. There's the training, there's the eating, there's fitness, there's all those things. There's 4 a.m. wake up calls. There's, early mornings, there's late nights, there's travel for a long time, right? And how many times do you think that person says, oh, I don't feel like doing this? The Michael Jordan thing, it wasn't really a Michael Jordan thing. It was the Bulls thing, The Last Dance, that was on early in this pandemic.
Yeah.
There was a portion of that where they talked about his schedule one summer when he was filming Space Jam. And he was like, I am not going to give up my summer of training to do this movie. So they built him a state-of-the-art basketball court and training facility in Hollywood where he would go and film. I think they said he filmed for 12 hours a day from 7 to 7. He had an hour break for lunch, or maybe 2 hours. And he would train, lift weights with his personal trainer that entire lunch break, come back, film all day. And then the who's who of NBA players goes to this court and they play pickup games for several hours at night. Who is willing to work that hard? You want to know why Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan? He's doing that at the peak of his career. He's already won 3 NBA titles at that time, and he's working that hard. Everybody wants to look at him at that point, and they're like, oh, it must be nice. I'd like to be Michael Jordan. Well, are you willing to put in that much work? And that's where the fuck your feelings thing comes in. That's where what I really want for people is to understand how our feelings can lead us astray and make us it's kind of like the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, right? In feelings, the limbic system, that's the devil on the one shoulder that says, oh, it's okay, you're tired, you've had a long day, you don't have to do this, you can watch Netflix, or you can do whatever. And then the angel on the other shoulder is the prefrontal cortex. It's the one that is capable of thinking beyond the now. And it says, well, if you really want to accomplish this thing, you know what you need to be doing. Do that. And you'll see when you get the books that I sent you, I signed them. Most of the books that I sign these days, I sign it, may your actions always align with your values. And in order to do that, a lot of times we just have to say, you know what? Fuck your feelings. Do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it.
Yeah, I love that. One of the quotes that not quote, but a statistic from Antonio Damasio that I found really interesting was just that how often decisions are made off our feelings. I think it was 95% are emotional-based decisions, 5% is logical. I'm curious, when you look at the framework of maybe having someone with their why, right? Start with why and attaching that to maybe an emotional reason why you're going to do that work, even when you don't want to. Is that maybe part of like the hack to shift your why that you're going to do something within that feeling? Or is it somewhere in between where it is just saying like, no, I'm not going to sleep in, or I'm not going to eat donuts. I'm going to still do the work. I find that delineation really interesting.
Yeah, I do too. So this one has actually really been kind of comical to me over the last few weeks. I've seen this. There's a new commercial that Lowe's has, of all people. Lowe's has this commercial on TV, and they're talking about safety. And of course, that's a big concern right now. Businesses are reopening, and I don't have to explain why safety is an issue right now. But the narrator of the commercial is saying, Lowe's, safety has always been important to us. And I forget, like, they use a couple of different levels, and they say, like,
the commercial. Yeah.
Okay. So like the first layer of it is like, real superficial. And then they're like, it's not even a priority for us. Priorities shift, right? And this gets into the states and traits. It gets into transient versus long-term. And they say it's a value. And I get such a kick out of that, because this is what I teach and this is what I talk about. And then to see a company like Lowe's leveraging that for marketing is just, I get a kick out of it. But they understand, and that's why they're using it as a marketing angle, that like, hey, we didn't just decide all of a sudden that we care about safety because it's cool. We've always cared about it. And the way that they're saying that, but the way that they're trying to show that is to say it's a value, and that values are deeper and last longer. And that's another reason that I am so focused on helping people get to what their values are. Because again, as Lowe's alludes to, values are less likely to change and shift than emotional states or feelings, right? And that's the important part of understanding states and traits, is that they're fleeting, they're transient, they come and they go. And if we're making decisions based on fleeting, transient, short-term feelings, that's like being out in the middle of the ocean and saying, well, which way is the wind blowing today? Let's go that way. It's going to be really hard to leave London in a boat and wind up at New York City if every day you wake up at sea and say, well, let's just go whichever way the wind's blowing. Like, okay. You're going to land in Brazil, and you're going to be like, oh, hey, well, let's call these people New Yorkers. Right. So I think that, I guess to try to tie that into your question, when we start to investigate our why, and the way this was taught to me is my mentor, Paul Reddick, and he was my business coach when I started my gym back in 2012. We've gotten to the point where we're now business partners and working on a book together. He calls this process 5-6-7, and 5-6-7 refers to the deeper layers of peeling the onion. And so most people will tell you, if I asked you, and we don't have to go through this whole exercise. I don't want to put you on the spot and try to 5-6-7 you right here. But if I were to ask you what you want, most people might give me a very superficial, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean that in like the anatomical way of like surface level, first layer of the onion. They're going to say, oh, well, I'd like to make $1 million. Okay, cool. How is your life any different, right? What are you going to do now that you have $1 million? Okay, well, after you buy your car and after you buy your house, what then, right? And you keep going and you keep peeling the layers and by the time you get to layers like 5, 6, and 7, we're in the land of growth and contribution and significance. We're in a different part of our needs. And so this is kind of like psychology, maybe 201 instead of 101. But if you go to 101, that's basically like Maslow's needs, right? So we need food and shelter and water, right? People like, I want a nice house, and I want money, and I want security, and I want love, and those types of things. And then, like I said, as we get into the layers of 5, 6, 7, those deeper layers, now you're getting into growth, significance, contribution. And if your why is in that level, you're almost going to be unflappable. There's almost nothing that will knock you off track or keep you from doing what you're supposed to do. And so I'll give you another example of, like, when I had the gym, this exercise was part of our intake process. And, you know, we'd have, let's say I have a 45-year-old mom come in and she says, you know, I've tried every diet, I've tried every fitness program, I'm frustrated, they all suck, nothing works, I just want to lose weight. And I'm like, okay. So like, that's like layer one, right? Like, this person comes in and they say, I want to lose 30 pounds. Okay, cool. You lost 30 pounds. How's your life different? Well, I probably have more energy and I feel great. Okay, cool. How's your life any different then? Well, I have energy, so, you know, I'm probably going to be able to play with my daughter more. Okay, that's great. But what's so great about that for you? Well, and then it gets into, like, now we start to transition into some like real deep shit. So, you know, maybe this person didn't have the best childhood, or even if they don't have deep seated issues, maybe it's, you know, I just want to provide the best life that I can for my daughter. Okay, what's so great about that? And now we're on level 5, right? We're going to start to get some really powerful answers from this person. And so I don't know how they would answer that question, but I think you understand that now, if this lady's in a workout and she's dogging it, and if I come up to her and I say, oh, hey, so-and-so, I thought you wanted to lose 30 pounds. She's like, oh, well, not right now, because I feel like shit. Like, you know, I'm hungover, or I'm tired, or whatever. But if I walk up to that person and I look her in the eye and I say, hey, remember, you're here because you want a better life for your daughter. You want energy. You want to be playing with her. You want to set a good example for her. You want to teach her. Boom. She found another gear, right? It doesn't matter how many burpees or what time in the morning she had to get up, or, you know, how much weight is on the bar, like, safely. You get what I'm saying, right? Yeah. And so if we can get that why into the world of values, instead of those superficial, you know, surface level layers, now we're at a point of connection and alignment where it's much more likely that we're going to follow through and realize the thing that we set out to do.
Yeah, I love that. When I was at Amazon, we had something similar. It was called the 5 Whys, but it reminds me of the toddler, maybe not toddler, 5 or 6-year-old in the back seat who's asking mom and dad, like, why? And then eventually they get to this like real deep answer and they're like, wow, I want to change my entire life. I don't know if that has ever come in your head, but like, that's what I picture when doing that, because you give superficial, and then you're just peeling back, and then all of a sudden you get to the core of it. Yeah. And I found, for me, one of my deep cores is I want to help people avoid pain that I've ran into or encountered in my life, suffering I've encountered. And so now I want to help people avoid that. If you look at the hero's journey, and I forget the building a story brand. Anyway, I want to be like the Obi-Wan to Luke Skywalker, as opposed to Luke Skywalker. Do you find that people do better when their why is attached to helping others avoid pain, or if it's something like almost aspirational in a way where they want to leave a legacy, or they really truly desire to be the greatest?
I don't think that I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but I don't think it matters which way they are leaning. I think what really determines their ability or likelihood to overcome any obstacle along the way is just how powerful that desire is, whether it's to be the greatest or to help others avoid pain or whatever. I mean, there's a certain level of commitment that we all have to that value, whatever it is, or that why, whatever you want to call it. And if it's deep enough in who we are, nothing will stop us, right? Like, I mean, we've all heard that example of, like, you know, the mom that can lift a car off of her baby or whatever, right? Like, if you're a parent and you know, your kid needs you, there's nothing you won't do. So I almost enjoyed coaching parents more, because I knew that was a hook that I could use as a coach to get them to the place where, especially if they were in there to create better habits or to set an example or to lead their children. That was just from a coaching standpoint, just a go-to. And so I think, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully, because again, like there are no blanket statements, right? We already said that earlier.
Right.
And for every person that I've seen where their commitment to be the best is genuine, I've seen 2 or 3. It's probably a 2 or 3 to 1 ratio where that desire to be the best stems from some deep-rooted childhood thing of insecurity or not getting the love that they need. And they learned that, hey, I'm really good at this thing. And when I do this thing, basketball or swimming or whatever, really well, I get love from my parents. I get love from the neighborhood. I get love from the town. And this becomes the way that they seek love. And maybe that lasts all the way to, a Hall of Fame career, but then you retire. And then what? How do you seek love? How do you get the thing that you always used sports to get? And so again, it's possible, but I think that, again, like you have to keep peeling the layers of that onion. Like, what was it about Michael Jordan that made him, have that really, really strong desire to be the best, right? There's something more there. And I think you started to get a glimpse of that in The Last Dance. Look at Lance Armstrong, that 30 for 30 or whatever it was that they did right afterwards on ESPN. You get a glimpse into why he felt like he needed to dominate and win everything. It goes beyond, there are layers below, even for them. I want to be the greatest.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if you've ever read Relentless, I think by Tim Grover, but he was Michael Jordan's coach, and he talks a lot about the dark side and how athletes will utilize this dark side. And I think you're totally right. And again, saying there is no blanket statements. It is finding awareness and then really dialing into whatever your core values or whatever that why is going to be. And it can be a lot of things. I think I just find it so fascinating because whenever I'm coaching someone, I want to believe that somewhere along their spectrum of that awareness that they need to find is that catapult that can get them to the next level or to levels that they didn't even think that they could get to.
Yeah. I have not read Relentless. I know of Tim Grover and of the book. It's interesting. I may read that just to find out how, maybe it's in there, maybe it's not, but I'd love to see if he was able to help people cultivate that ability to use dark side or dark energy. It's something that I've always done. And I've got a few friends that are competitive in a couple of different arenas that do it as well. And we always talk about it. And it's one of the things that I think has brought us closer together. One of them is a former lifting partner, and it's a reason that we were able to lift together because he couldn't find anybody that could push as hard as he could. And same for me. And it's because we both went to that place. And unless you have a partner that can go to that place, nobody else is going to be, a lifting partner this dude outweighed me by 30 pounds, but it didn't matter. Like I could push that hard because I went there. And I have worked with some people where, they're on the cusp of that and we can, it's something that as a coach, I'm a little bit leery of trying to develop because I'm not sure that that's the healthiest or the best thing. If it's not there and you don't have to do it, I don't know that you should.
Totally.
It's not something that has really been talked about or explored or studied. And I don't know, but if it is there, if you do have a thing that you can call upon, man, it can power you through some things that you didn't think you could do.
Totally. It reminded me two things. One of The Last Dance where they had the story where Jordan made up that someone was talking trash to him. And then it's like he created this dark side that he went to. But then you had I think it was a SEAL that you interviewed, and one of the things that he said in his tips was to have that place to go to. I can't remember the exact verbiage, But after that sentence, it also said like use it sparingly. I would love for in the future when there are studies that do come out, because I do find that fascinating, the people that are able to tap into really like the zone. And almost, I think of it as like a lion that is just locked in on a gazelle and nothing else has taken it out of that focus. Section of the book that I really found interesting, and you talk a lot about science, and I love all the different research and studies that you talk upon. We talk a lot about the Triune brain model that was formulated by Paul MacLean, and how each part of the brain, whether it's reptilian, mammalian, the neocortex, and how we can really move in between them, and the positives and negatives of each one. Could you dive a little bit more into that specific chapter and that specific concept?
Yeah. So, like you said, Paul MacLean, and it's the triune brain theory. And, MacLean was, he's basically one of the pioneers of neuroscience. And, he posited that the brain was actually three brains in one: the reptilian or lizard brain, the limbic system, and the neocortex. And so neocortex is also prefrontal cortex. And depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different name or term for it. And that's basically the most recently evolved portion of our brain. That's the one that is capable of, higher level thought, language, communication, being able to think beyond the now. And what's really interesting is you have a lot of different people who, especially in the early days of psychology, neuroscience, trying to understand, the human brain and body, putting out theories that, while maybe different, actually overlap quite a bit. And so another one would be like Dr. Stephen Porges. And so, even though he is more around breathing and vagus nerve, he still posited that we have, so he posited the polyvagal theory, PVT. And so the hierarchy there is, it's the same three levels as the triune brain. And you have kind of immobilization or scared shitless, then you have fight or flight, which would be the limbic system, and then you have communication, which would have been neocortex or prefrontal cortex. And so, again, I like the way you phrased the question, because they all have advantages. These things would not have survived evolution had they not had advantages. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I've actually looked at the book, but even in that same section, that same chapter of the book, there's some quotes from both Robert Dawkins and Charles Darwin, who, were more interested in studying evolution, and they had both written about emotion being widespread across, the human and the animal kingdoms, and saying, look, this thing would not have continued to be a part of these species through evolution if it didn't offer some advantage. And what we're really talking about in this conversation and in the book is, when feelings overstep their boundaries, right? And so the evolutionary purpose of feelings is to serve as a red flag, or an alarm or an alert to direct our attention and focus towards something. And so, 10,000 years ago, maybe that was, hey, dude, there's a saber-toothed tiger over there and it's creeping on you. You might want to pay attention to, that twig that just snapped 200 yards away. Now we live in a world of constant, let's call it sensory bombardment and mild sympathetic activation constantly, as opposed to, being parasympathetic. And I think, and again, like it's funny, like all these little talking points, they're all kind of interrelated, right? But with the parasympathetic and sympathetic, so sympathetic is fight or flight. And so if you're talking triune brain, that was the middle, or the second of the three. If you're talking polyvagal theory, again, it's the second one, it's fight or flight. That's the sympathetic nervous system. And then the parasympathetic is rest and digest, or feed and breathe. And the way our lives are now, most people never truly turn off the sympathetic, never truly turn on parasympathetic. So we live in this like chronic and constant state of kind of in, kind of out. it's funny. This is actually, I'm not sure if you've read the new book, Breath from James Nestor, but he talks about it a lot in that book. So that's a great book if you haven't read that one yet, Paul.
Yeah, I'll dive into that.
And for anybody listening, definitely check that one out. But he talks a lot about like the dangers of that. So I guess getting back to your question, I think just having an awareness of these are all parts of how we're wired. These are all parts that can serve us. And these are also parts that can fail to serve us or can negatively impact us if we allow them to overstep their bounds or if we're not auditing them. And so, again, it comes back to that awareness, having an awareness of this, and awareness creates choice. And do I want to use my right hand to pick up this thing or do I want to use my left hand? Okay, well, I need my right hand to hold the pen and write. So maybe I'm going to hold my phone in my left hand, right? Like we're thinking about these things. And so it's not that much of a different thought process or decision-making matrix to say, okay, do I want to respond to this situation with my prefrontal cortex or do I want to use my limbic system and go into fight or flight.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, the thing that I really like that you brought up is just how we wouldn't have evolved with emotions like fear or anger, which sometimes people will deem as bad, or people run away from stress or these things that biologically allow us to survive. And I love that in the book that you brought those up. Yes, you don't want a lot of fear and you don't want to live in that, but it is that awareness of, all right, I'm overthinking things too much. Maybe I'm too prefrontal and I need to just react. And maybe it's a sport and you need to trust your instincts versus if you're just going right off of feeling and reacting versus responding, then you're going to run into issues as well.
Yeah, and it's funny, as we have conversations like this, I think, and anybody who's read the book understands that, fuck your feelings on the surface, it's a useful kind of hashtag or thought process, but the book is also way more than just fuck your feelings, right? I'm not telling people to ignore feelings or that feelings and emotions are all bad. But I always laugh because, if I'd called it the neuroscience of high performance or, that's going to scare a lot of people away. I saw your face change just when I said that. And I mean, you're a dude that's into this stuff, right?
There's a smart marketing angle that you're playing with that, which I laughed when you brought that up right away. I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Let's get this out of the way from the start. It's got to grab your attention on the shelf. And if it was like I told you, I like signing the books, may your actions always align with your values. And if that was the name of the book, nobody would read it.
Yeah, 100%. The thing about breath, that I'm definitely going to check that book out. It's something that I've been diving into a ton, and it was introduced to me through yoga as I've gotten more into training and just how the body is so connected. Your section on breathing and the different types, whether it's box breathing or the Wim Hof method, breath, it really is the center of everything, whether it's biomechanically and how our body functions from the core out to our extremities, or how our breath can really be what controls the parasympathetic or the sympathetic nervous systems. I feel like this is a very broad question, so I'm trying to narrow it down a little bit. What are some of the first places that you'll start with someone who maybe is chronically sympathetic, and you're like, all right, but most people look at breathing and they're like, I've done it since I was a kid, I don't need to do it. Why do people need to focus on breath, and where can they start if it is something that they need help with?
So I'm actually, all right, there's a lot I want to say on this one. So first of all, as you mentioned, this is a section of the book, and the way that it's presented in the book is that breath is a tool. It's one of the tools in our toolbox. And specifically, as we mentioned in the very first question that you asked, it's one of those tools that shifts our states now, but also positively impacts our traits later. And I think in the section, I may have even said, this is something that entire books could be written about. And as I just said, James Nestor's new book, Breath, is phenomenal. If anybody wants more on this, he goes way deeper into like the biochemistry, the biomechanics, how our skulls have changed over the years, and why we need to breathe through the nose, and like all of these things. And also another great book is Oxygen Advantage by Patrick McEwen. And I've actually taken Patrick's master class, trying to get him on our podcast as a guest, but scheduling is proving a little bit difficult. We're going to make that happen. And I'm going to ask him the exact same question you just asked me. I'm going to be like, Patrick, this is your life's work. How do you overcome that obstacle when you first meet somebody and they say exactly what you just said, Paul? It's like, dude, I've been breathing my whole life. I don't need you to teach me how to breathe. Like there's nothing wrong with the way I'm breathing. And then, so I kind of want to steal whatever it is that he uses to overcome that very quickly. Personally, for me, I don't know. Like I guess I always kind of come back to like, well, there's a lot of things you've done a certain way. Just because you've always done things a certain way doesn't make them the right way, right? And then depending on who they are and what I know they do, I can bring something up that they can relate to, right? If they're a golfer, I can talk about a golf swing. If they're a football player, we can talk about, whatever. So I always try to use a field that they can relate to. And I think that kind of opens the door to, their acceptance or openness to, hearing this out. And so as far as like, where do we start? I mentioned nasal breathing. I would, if we're just talking like quick hitters and how do we get somebody started, I would say shut your mouth and breathe through your nose. People are amazed at how much they breathe through their mouth. Never fails, right? They're like, man, like sometimes it's within a day, sometimes it's within a week, whatever, but usually it's within a day or two. People are like, man, I didn't realize how much I was breathing through my mouth. So close your mouth, breathe through your nose. The mouth is supposed to be backup for breathing. We are supposed to breathe in and out through our nose. And that's kind of, and when I say that, I mean like our default breath. There are a lot of breathing techniques, maybe Wim Hof, maybe pranayama, maybe certain other yogic breaths where there's an intentional reason to either inhale or exhale through the mouth, but that is serving a specific purpose. That's not the default way that we should be breathing. The other thing, and this is in the book, as you mentioned, I was really fortunate to be able to talk to Dr. Stephen Porges. And so he's actually the guy who discovered heart rate variability. He's not just the polyvagal theory guy. And so, if you're wearing a fitness tracker of any kind, or, if you're wearing an Oura Ring or a Whoop and, you're tracking body battery or readiness or any of those things, that's all really related to heart rate variability. And so he's the guy that, in the 1960s discovered this. And the thing that he told me when I got to interview him, and this is the thing that's really made any breath work for me significantly more powerful and impactful, is that the inhalation is sympathetic. The exhalation is parasympathetic. And so whether you're doing, that's the governing dynamic behind breath. And so I get so many questions on, should I do Wim Hof, or should I do this, or should I do that? Like, what type of breathing is best? Well, best is defined by what is your desired outcome. If your desired outcome is activation, then I'm going to answer that question differently than if your desired outcome is to calm down and downregulate and, get parasympathetic. So if you understand the governing dynamics, if you have ownership of the information, you can be a chef instead of a cook, right? And so this is one of the things that we do in the Better Human Workshop is, helping people understand the importance of being a chef. And I use that as an analogy because everybody knows what it's like to be in the kitchen. And, if you're a cook, you have to have a recipe in order to arrive at a certain dish. If you're a chef, you can look at a recipe, throw it out the window, use it as a jumping off point, and you can do your own thing, right? That requires ownership of information. So back to, breathing, understanding that the exhale being parasympathetic just means like it doesn't matter what your cadence is. If you want it to be calming or parasympathetic, just make the exhale longer than the inhale. So you can even do this like when you're jogging. And again, some of these techniques are in the book Breath as well. So it's really cool to hear him talking about that. But like let's say the ideal breath, and this is where I don't want to say disagree, but I was taught 4 inhale and 6 count exhale. So a 4-second inhale, 6-second exhale. That was the ideal breath. In the book Breath, James Nestor says it's 5.5 in, 5.5 out, about 5.5 of those per minute. So it's not that much different. But to me, the difference in if you can with your default breath have a longer exhale, then you're going to spend more time in the parasympathetic state. And as you know, that's something that I think we're all in need of right now.
Yeah. Parasympathetic is something that I think will become more and more common as maybe social media picks up on it. But whether you are lifting weights and want to get bigger, you have to be parasympathetic. If you want to sleep, you got to get parasympathetic. If you want to not be stressed because you got an email from Steven down the hall, like you got to get parasympathetic. And that's a big thing I'll try and talk with my clients about. It's just like, how can we create parasympathetic inputs? Because Lord knows you have plenty of sympathetic inputs. And so I really love that section in your book, and I'll definitely be sure and check out those other books that you mentioned, because it is something that is truly fascinating to me, and in a way unlocks athleticism, unlocks health, which is a big part of what you do on the Better Human Project and your book. And so I think to wrap this up, I'd love to hear what is coming up next, maybe for the Better Human Project, any things that you've done recently that you're super proud of. You guys, whether it's the podcast or the workshops that you do, it's a lot of really cool work and really helping people be better. So I'll leave you there.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we haven't been able to do any workshops in 2020 because of COVID. That's been a bummer. I really miss working with people in person. Haven't done any speaking gigs, had quite a few this year that have already been canceled. And it looks like this whole year is going to be a wash for that. So as far as projects coming up, I mentioned Paul earlier. He and I are working on a book. That's going to be really cool when that comes out. So that's kind of where the focus is right now. As far as Better Human Project goes, I mean, again, a lot of that was, dependent upon travel. We are still going to record some interviews and put some episodes out. I mean, like I said, we're working on a show with Patrick. So yeah, it's continuing to do the same work that I and we have always done, but just looking for new ways to be able to do it given changing landscapes, but also new projects to go further with some of the work and things that we've already started.
Yeah, I found in a way, if you want to pull a good thing out of COVID, is it's given me some creative constraint to where I literally do have to focus on just one or two things as an entrepreneur. As you know, you do so many things and have so many people pulling on you. You really could spend 24 hours really easily. So I like that. Maybe you're able to write the book more or faster because you have more time.
That was the hope, but without going off on another tangent, let's just say the first book was self-published, and this second book, we've spent the last year talking to agents and publishers, and we were very close in February and early March to signing a deal with the publisher. And like we just joked, my hope was that we would finalize that, and then I could spend quarantine, however long it lasted, writing the book. But that process got a lot more drawn out and ended up, as it stands now, we're going to be self-publishing. So we're kind of back to designing the project on our own from scratch. And so that writing process will begin, in the next couple of weeks, begin again. So yeah. A little bit of frustration there, but learning experience, man. We really did. We got to work with some really great people, and we learned a lot. And yeah, I think if there's a silver lining for me with the quarantine and not being able to travel, it is that forced slowdown. It was funny. I was looking back and kind of auditing my goals for the year, and one of them was to slow down and enjoy it. This is not exactly the pace that I was going for, but that forced slowdown and being at home, there's definitely been some advantages to that.
Yeah, 100%. All right. One last question, a little bit of a personality question. You mentioned Bruce Springsteen a lot in your books, and I was lucky enough to see him in Portland, and I'd heard some of his songs, and I was blown away that guy could perform for 2.5 hours and have me captivated the entire time without knowing every single song. And so,
okay, so I got to ask you now, like, having seen that, on a scale of 1 to 10, tell me your level of Springsteen fandom prior to the show, and then tell me what level it is after the show.
I mean, we could probably say from like a 2 to a 7. I was in like the upper ring of the Motor Center in Portland.
And that's the magic of this guy. Like, if people have not seen him in person, like, to take somebody from a 2 to a 7, even though you were sitting in the upper ring, like, you got to see this dude live. When did you see him?
Would have been when I was living in Portland, probably 2017, 2016.
Okay.
Cool. So a little while ago.
That's awesome.
My question for you is, you can either have him perform a private birthday concert for you and your buddies, or you can sit down and have dinner with him, whatever dinner you guys want.
Dinner. Yeah, I would love to be able to talk to him. I have so many things that I would like to be able to talk to him about.
Yeah, I love the stories that you told about him just banging away on, I think it was a bass guitar, and he just strung it up, and someone was like, hey, that's not an actual guitar. He's like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm just going to perform 1,000 shows before I even get paid for one, which really is like the ultimate mindset.
Well, and it goes back to what we were talking about with some of these other guys earlier. Like, are you committed to your thing enough to like to overcome anything? It's like, he didn't even know how to string a guitar. He's like, I don't care. I'm just going to put some strings on here, or, like, I'm going to pick this thing up and I'm going to go play it, and not just play it in his house, but like play shows with it. And it's funny that story that you mentioned is in his book, Born to Run. So I mean, if you're looking for another book recommendation, that's a good one too.
Cool. Yeah, it's stories like that really make autobiographies or any kind of documentaries just hilarious, because you're like, that's something you can take away, and it definitely sticks.
And I think that's one that, like, I hope other people pull lesson like that from that story. I mean, that's to me, like, when you read an autobiography or listen to them, you're like, everybody's looking for those, like, I guess, like, the spotlight moments, right? Like the things that stand out, like the lifetime achievement type things. And, it's little anecdotes like that stand out to me. That's why I love reading those autobiographies, because I'm like, man, I think the people that I work with, and when I'm around people at events and workshops, and there's this perception that Navy SEALs or Olympic athletes or, the Springsteens of the world are just different people, that they have something that other people don't have. And in a way, that is true. For the most part, it's absolutely not true. They're just like us. But the thing that they have is the desire to do whatever it takes. They're super connected to that why or their values or whatever you want to talk about, and they're willing to, to say, screw your feelings, and I'm going to screw my feelings. I'm going to do what I need to do to get where I need to get, or what I need to do. So.
Yeah, I think that perfectly wraps up where we started and the essence of the book. And last thing is just, where can people find you on social media and your podcast? And then, as you mentioned earlier, we'll be giving out a free book to whoever tags this episode, and really grateful for you for providing that for one of my listeners.
Yeah. So maybe since you brought up Springsteen, we can have them, share the show and put their favorite Springsteen song or something on there.
I love that.
That's up to you. That's up to you. So everything I do kind of runs through my website. That's kind of the central hub for everything, ryanmunsey.com. You can find Better Human Project there or wherever you listen to podcasts. They have the book, Fuck Your Feelings. You can get it on my website, Amazon, Audible, if you're a podcast or audiobook listener. Social media is, I guess I'm most active on Instagram. I have a love-hate relationship with social media, but on Instagram, it is at @RyanMunsey_.
Cool. Awesome, Ryan. Well, thank you so much for your time. Loved having you on. I could talk to you and pick your brain for 7 podcasts, but this hour will do, and I appreciate your time.
All right, Paul. Thank you, man. Have a good one.
You too. Before I let you go, just want to say thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you are listening to today's podcast within a week of the air date, be sure and tag Ryan and I. Let us know that you're listening, and also get an opportunity to win a free signed copy of Fuck Your Feelings, signed copy by the author. And one last favor on my end, if you haven't had a chance yet, be sure and leave a 5-star rating review of the Down Dog Athletics podcast on iTunes. Every 5-star rating and review helps us continue to grow the podcast, get on awesome guests like Ryan. One last thing, I know I said that right before, but I'm going to hit you with another one. If you're interested in coaching and figuring out what that is like with Down Dog Athletics, sign up for free 30 days of coaching on downdogathletics.com, or you can text DDA30 to 22828. That's DDA30 to 22828. Sign up for 30 days of coaching free, sent to your inbox with videos, podcasts, blogs, and other tools to help you live a better life. That's all I got. I'll catch you guys next time on the Down Dog Athletics podcast.